much. Thanks for sticking around, everyone. Yeah, I'm Lucas, talking about land use change in Ajax. So Ajax, lower tier municipality in Durham region, about 67 square kilometers. These are some figures from the official plan of Ajax. So the town has a population increase projection of 26,000 between 2011 and 2031. This is from 2016 census. So they plan on having 11,300 new dwellings to accommodate for this. So there's some, just like the GTA, how we heard about in some prior presentations, it's expanding urban intensification. And they have a goal of maintaining this parkland per resident, but I won't get into that too much. So, well, as part of this, the town of Ajax contracted the TRCA to do a tree study, and that's where I did my internship. So yeah, the sampling, iTree Eco protocol. So that's mostly for carbon modeling, but I didn't use it for that. So yeah, we measured all trees larger than 2.5 centimeters or 5 centimeters in forest by DBH. These were 200 fixed area plots randomly scattered throughout Ajax, and they were sampled in 2008 and 2022. Each plot has a stratum, forest, open, or urban. Here are the plots. There's 179 pictured there. That's the plots that were resampled. We had 220 each year, so some didn't line up. And then this is what the plots look like from the VSP manual. So this is getting into the results. So we sampled a bit over 1,200 trees, 36.2 square meters of basal area, average of 167 trees per hectare over the whole town. So that's 230 new trees, 7.76 new square meters of basal area in the past 14 years. So by stratum, I won't look at open areas because there are no trees in open areas, but urban areas had 6.2 square meters per hectare. They grew at a rate of 0.17 per hectare per year. Forest areas were much more productive. They have more trees and more basal area. They also grow at like 0.43 square meters per hectare per year. And as an aside, treeless to tree areas grew 0.05 square meters per hectare per year. So they're growing slowest, but also I don't know when those trees were planted. So the forest of Ajax, so these are the top 20 species in the forest of Ajax. Green is 2008, blue is 2022. And on the left or on the right axis is the count, the frequency per species with the bars, and on the other axis is basal area with these dashes. So as you can see, white cedar is kind of setting the scale for the forest. Lots of new growth. And another species worth mentioning is Scots pine, who has seen a lot of newcomers. So here are two PCAs. As you can see here, there's kind of three wings. There's the sugar maple. These are USDA species code. So there's sugar maple, and then in kind of moisture sites, there's green ash and Manitoba maple, some like buckthorn at the bottom. And then there's this on the drier, sandier sites, it's the Scots pine, balsam poplar, paper birch. And in 2022, it's much of the same, but there's more white cedar encroaching there towards Scots pine. There's red pine there on the sugar maple wing, I think because of red pine plantations that have been acquired by the TRCA and are succeeding to sugar maple. So this is the change in species importance, change between those two PCAs. So there's white cedar and some American elm inversely correlated with hemlock, red oak, American beech, paper birch. And on the other axis is Scots pine and white spruce inversely correlated. So this is what a lot of the forests look like, pretty dense white cedar. Yeah, and then Scots pine in the sandier areas. And then the green ash forests, a lot of dead green ash, some American elm. So you can see there, succeeding in, oh, and also dying. So yeah, this is the stratum. So the change in stratum, there's 4% of plots kind of succeeded to urban, from forest, and 2 from open, but the majority stayed urban. Yeah, here we can, this is just to show the basal area growth is significant, and there is more growth in forest areas. So now into land use, here's a map of Ajax. Blue is urbanized, core urbanized areas. And I cut that out in GIS for 2022 and 2008. And where they didn't match is the red area. So red is new urbanized area. And then, yeah, the green borders are 100-meter buffer around urbanized areas. So from that, I have 3 land use classes, and it's kind of the same picture, mostly urban and stayed urban. But when we split the forested areas into the edge and the core forest, we can see, yeah, some more change. So both of those, forest and forest edge, have lost area, and urban has gained 22%. This is again the basal area growth by class. Forests are growing the most. So does land use change affect the forests around it? What's kind of my question. So here we have a distance to land use change and the change in basal area. So there is a significant relationship. Trees are growing more further away from land use change, but that's mostly because you can see the red points on further away. Those are forested areas. Forests are more productive. So invasive species. So more invasive species in 2022 than 2008. 4 more plots. So that has a pretty big effect, but it's the wrong, not the way I want it. So there's many more invasive species further away from land use change. That's because of Scots pine in these forested areas that are far away from land use change. So when we remove that, there's not really anything significant. But I noticed this kind of downwards trend within the first kilometer. So if we isolate that, it's not very significant, but there is a downwards trend. Yeah, so from there, if we look at these urbanized classes, this is the average plot. How many invasive species is the average plot? Targeted invasive species. So that's just looking at buckthorn, Manitoba maple, and Norway maple. And within 100-meter buffer has most of the invasive species. Interestingly, there's no Norway maple outside of urbanized. So the urbanized area is just pretty much Norway maple. And then buckthorn and Manitoba maple, there's a lot of those within 100 meters of urbanized areas. And this is kind of the downfall of my project, I think. I only have tree data and tree data for stems over 5 centimeters. And trees are pretty slow to grow. So this is what we saw in Ajax. A lot of like buckthorn carpets. It is like coming in, and then also dog strangling vine, these old pine plantations. Well, yeah, dog strangling vine is like everywhere in Ajax. So there are invasive species, but I didn't, the tree data didn't necessarily pick all of it up. So in conclusion, the tree canopy of Ajax is growing, but maybe it's not a desirable change. I didn't pick up, or I didn't touch on it, but I did an tree canopy study, and the canopy did grow, but I kind of attribute that to the Scots pine coming in, invading some white cedar, and also a lot of farmland is kind of, I noticed a lot of farmland is succeeding to urbanized area. Farmland has no trees and urbanized area has some trees. So maybe some of that is from that also. So yeah, 42% new basal areas from white cedar, 25 from Scots pine, and the forests are growing more. So kind of worth protecting that more. So future, there are, this is projected increase in population and housing to account for that, accommodate for those new people. So the forest edge, I think, is kind of moving, encroaching into the forest, and that's where most of the invasive species I found are. Yeah, with that, here's my thank you slide. Thank you to, this is the TRCA ecosystem and climate science team. Thank you to them. Big thank you to Sarah Cody Knight and Krishna Selvakumar, who's my external supervisor in town of Ajax, for letting me use the data that they own. And big thank you to Dr. Danijela Puric-Mladenovic being my supervisor. Big help, and the whole MFC class. Thank you all for listening until the end of the day.
Thanks, Lucas. I'll let Krishna ask the first question.
Thanks so much, and great presentation, Lucas. I'm pretty curious to hear your input on this, given that the forest studies is a longitudinal study being completed once every decade with opportunities to assess change over time, given that we're resampling a ton of plots. What are some changes or additions you'd like to see with the field protocol to help build upon the work that you've done, particularly with understanding the role of urbanization and land use change on invasive species establishment and spread?
Well, yeah, ground vegetation, smaller invasive plants and smaller invasive trees would be good to look at. For everyone else not in the TRCA, the crews that were working in King Township and Aurora had an additional protocol for collecting invasive species information. I think that would be pretty good to use, but I think that's the town of Ajax. I guess they just didn't want that. And maybe it would be good to also look at tree health, if that's affected by, the change.
Yeah, that's a great point, Lucas. Yeah, like you mentioned, this is a forest study that we did in York Region as well with a bunch of municipal partners there. And we did include the invasive, so I think it's something that we should chat about with Ajax going forward, especially with the trend that you're seeing with naturalized areas, including that buffer area, seeing the highest invasive species spread. But yeah, once considering invasive vegetation too, we might see a different trend. So that's a great point. I have another question as well, if there's time for it.
Oh, yes, there's time. Go ahead.
Awesome. Yeah, the Scots pine plantation is an interesting case, given that, you know, it was found at a dry site. Some foresters previously recommended planting Scots pine as a way to help stabilize sites like these. Just wondering what your thoughts are on this one, but assuming it's not an active stand, what management practices would you like to see implemented in such stands to improve native diversity and forest function as a whole, especially with this plantation being pretty close to Greenwood, which is a TRCA protected and owned land, and with a lot of that Bill 23 scares, I'm imagining a lot of CAs are looking at improving and bolstering their protected lands.
Right, yeah, I think that's a great question. I think an underplanting in those areas would be beneficial. It's pretty sparse there. Maybe some of the Scots pine can be cut down, like almost like a shelter wood, but not for to leave like seed source, and they can be underplanted and eventually removed. Maybe, and I think in Ontario, I guess there's a history of using red pine like that, maybe planting red pine and other pines, white pine, and this pine barren ecosystem. I think in Ontario, jack pine is in that, but I don't think that's a good idea in Ajax. But further south, I think New Jersey pine barrens I've looked into, and there's pitch pine, and maybe it could be looked into, assisted like range expansion, maybe. And I saw a lot of red oak, like just seedlings in that area. Maybe red oak is trying to come in. So maybe those are some species that could be planted. I don't know. I touched on this a little. This is an appendix in my paper a little bit.
Great. Yeah, no, I think those are great points and good suggestions. Yeah, looking forward to reading your paper once it's done and something we can maybe chat about some more. But yeah, thanks again for all your hard work over the summer and even going into September. I think you did a great job. Thanks, Lucas.
Thank you. Thank you.
Danijela?
Hey, Lucas, great job. And my question, first of all, thanks for pushing U4 and showing the shortcomings of the U4 data. I'm sorry for saying that, but I have to be blunt because you've shown that we have to look in more forests, not just at trees. So that being said, you already addressed that you saw buckthorn, but there are other species, and I'm positive based on other work that you would see more correlation and impact of urban areas on ground vegetation. So as Chris said, maybe the recommendation should be to Ajax, in particular for those natural areas, to look forest as a complex of plants, not just trees. But going back to that white cedar, so what's your feeling? Why that is happening? Any idea?
Well, I think white cedar is kind of succeeding in a lot of these areas. There's a lot of these old kind of like abandoned field kind of areas where like that picture, I don't know if I should. Well, whatever. One of those pictures was in that like field that was kind of getting reclaimed by white cedar. It was super dense. And I think that's happening in a lot of these areas. And in the Scots pine treed sand barren ecosystem, there's a lot of these white cedar. Well, not a lot. There's some white cedar in there too. So I think it's kind of just coming in where it can. And I guess it's pretty shade tolerant, so it's happy to come up under other species.
Yeah, but also white cedar, behaves as a secondary succession species on some agricultural fields and depending on the soil, which you captured quite well for that part of the GTA. What about the Scotch pine? Is it like plantation, or that might be like an abundant Christmas farm? Do you know? Christmas tree farm?
I don't know for sure. I looked for old images. I found some from like 1950, but I don't know. I couldn't really
Yeah.
tell. I guess there's some seed source nearby that's blowing over. But I don't know from where. Maybe a Christmas tree farm that was left alone.
Yeah, that's the other issue that we find in some parts of southern Ontario where, there are a few Scotch pines left after a Christmas tree farm, it's abandoned, and then you see like a clump of them growing. So that's another issue and another problem on the landscape. But yeah, good work and thanks for addressing the limits of U4.
Thank you.
Thanks, Danijela. Are there any other questions from the audience here in person? No? And what about virtually? Okay. All right, well, I guess that concludes the first day of